Jonathan Haidt says, one of his lines I liked a lot is, it's the job of the parent to frustrate their children a little bit each day. So I love that line, that there's a sense in which challenges are actually the matter for real parenting. So that's where the direction occurs. So that's where you need to connect and redirect, because the impulse that kids have will be for instant gratification and avoiding challenges. But their real growth, their real ability to thrive on challenge relies on the parent staying with them and then connecting with them.
Before we get started, if you enjoy these episodes, you might want to check out more at optimwork.com. Our website offers unique content, tools, and exercises to help you thrive at work and beyond. We have an in-depth masterclass covering our entire theory of growth, daily recommendations for personalized advice, and a platform to help groups and organizations learn and practice optimal work together. You can get a free trial at optimwork.com. Now let's start the episode. Hey, this is Sharif here with another episode of the Optimal Work Podcast, joined by Dr. Kevin Majeres. Kevin, good to be back here with you again.
Hey, Sharif, it's great to be back.
Yeah, after a little break. And it was great. Interesting choice that our last two rebroadcasts were about a couple episodes we did on parenting like over a year ago on Alfie Kohn's Punished by Rewards. And so I thought it would be great to dive back into that topic, optimal parenting, with a little series, because you've been working on some new ideas that apply optimal work to parenting and really build out a beautiful theory of how that all works. So I'd love to dive into that with you.
Great. I look forward to getting into this. I've been studying it deeply for a while now, after having shied away for a long time, because it's very difficult to know who are really the best authorities on parenting, and trying to find who. But then the more research I did, the more a very clear picture emerged that actually fit really well with a lot of things we've covered in the past, like anxious children, and some advice that Jonathan Haidt had given in the book The Anxious Generation. So everything started really coming together, and seeing that what we're talking about in optimal work squarely applies directly to everything in parenting. And so I'm here. I'm looking forward to talking about it.
Yeah. And it also does seem like over the past few years, we've just been getting more and more questions of relating to this topic. How do I apply optimal work as a parent, as someone working from home, working a lot with kids, or how do I teach optimal work to younger children? So that whole thing. So I think it's great that we're going to now dive into this topic here. Now, I know that you had also, one of the maybe more immediate triggers was hearing about a book that you thought, this is not the right approach. So I wonder if you could tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah. So I had listened originally to a podcast with Tim Ferriss and Naval Ravikant on this book, The Sovereign Child by Aaron Stuppel, who's a doctor who has 5 children and is going through his parenting philosophy. So listening to the podcast, I was taken aback, I would say. It was stuff that fit exactly what I thought were kind of the stereotypes of gentle parenting. That what is this thing of gentle parenting? In my research, I did eventually see that I actually don't have much problems with gentle parenting properly understood. But what Stuppel was presenting in the book, The Sovereign Child, I think is fairly shocking as far as the parenting literature goes. And so that was a spur in me wanting to do a deeper dive. It's always great when you can find a book that gives an exactly kind of opposite approach to what my clinical intuition and common sense had said. And so, not to be, I think that, the motives of the book are, very good, but I have real problems with the advice that he gives. And anyways, we can, if you want, maybe it's helpful to go through The Suffering Child a little bit and to go through what were his recommendations. Yeah. Because okay, great. The overarching idea is that desires are good and rules are bad. And that might seem like I'm vastly oversimplifying, but I think it's, uh, he actually says that an unsatisfied desire is a problem and all problems have solutions. And the truth is that we should always try to get what we want. Now, that's problematic for adults because we have different levels of wanting. And there may be parts of us that want things that the rest of us don't want. And so just this idea, I'm not even talking about IFS. I'm just saying that the way we're structured, we can want things that we know aren't good for us. So to say that you should always get what you want, it's like, well, you probably have to specify that, qualify that a little more. But then he also is very squarely saying that rules are basically guaranteed to do psychological harm if you have any rules for the children. So the whole book is built on this idea of taking children seriously. It's a movement that comes from David Deutsch, and they say kind of founded on the epistemology of Karl Popper. I'm not sure how central that is to the book, but then when you get to what he says about his three classic examples that he uses are what should you do with regard to food, with sleep, and with screens. Yeah, and that's where getting in, it's a little more shocking. Because he thinks that food, sleep, and screens are like three signature areas where children have to have total freedom. And so, and he's very direct on this. So he actually asked the question, so should parents really just try to let their children eat whatever they want? And he says, the short answer is yes. And then admits that his 5-year-old son for the past few months had been eating nothing but ice cream. And he thinks that if you have rules about food, it's going to create power struggles. Kids are going to become disconnected from their natural hunger cues. And in some way, this will harm the bond with the parents. Okay, so that's like the first big claim.
Now, so I can see that there's something there that might be attractive, which is that ultimately what you're trying to do in parenting is to help the kids, your kids, to grow up to make their own good decisions. And so sometimes that requires letting them make bad decisions as part of teaching them that, so that they learn, okay, this bad decision that I made has consequences. I started eating ice cream all the time, so I don't know, I got sick to my stomach, or I started performing worse at sports, or I gained weight and I don't want to do that.
Yeah.
So then they start to learn and say, okay, I guess now I know that I need to eat vegetables and have a more balanced diet and that sort of thing.
Yeah.
So is that kind of what he's aiming for, and he just goes a little too far, or what do you think about that?
Yeah, and I think that idea is truly, that is the right overall goal for parenting. That the children have internalized your values, that they are like trying to be the best adults they can be in the world, raising children of their own. So that vision of that eventually we want people learning from their own behaviors is totally true. Yeah, and that's an eventual goal. But children and adults differ in terms of their ability to observe feedback loops. If a child starts developing a B12 deficiency, he's not going to notice that he's getting a little more irritable. That even adults would have trouble noticing the effects of nutrient deficiencies. So, and to think that, if I have, ultra processed food for lunch, then I end up having less productive work in the afternoon. Now, it is hard for adults to make that kind of connection, even though they might be having like A/B testing all week, every week. Whereas sometimes they have a really healthy lunch and they work great, and sometimes they have a bad lunch and they work poorly, and it's hard for adults to put that together spontaneously. But for children, it's just impossible. You can't have the negative consequence can't happen 6 months to 6 years after the behavior. So, and we can get into more reasons why this particularly is challenging. Yeah, so we'll come back to that. This idea of can children learn from in the way he's saying. The second thing is about bedtime. And he thinks that children should go to sleep and stay up whatever they like. And if it makes it hard for them to go to school, then it's just another reason for the children not to go to school. So he thinks that it's better that children be unschooled, and that they be learning on YouTube things that they're passionate about. So most parents would have a problem with that. But he thinks that any rules around sleep are going to provoke, again, this kind of frustration, and it's going to harm the child in some way, disconnecting them from his or her natural sleeping patterns. And then screens. Basically, he thinks you should be able to, kids of any age should watch as much of any screen that they want. So that there should be no rules on screens. And again, for the same ideas, that he thinks that they'll be disconnected from responsible self-regulation if and his son, the ice cream eater, also spends at least I think it is. It sounded like it was the same kid. Several hours a day scrolling videos on all these different topics, and that's how he spends his days. Anyway, so so that's like the idea. There is a big problem with the sovereign child, and that's that it does not take into account the effect of behavior on the brain, and that these behaviors are profoundly shaping the brains of the children, and those brains are going to be necessary for them making good decisions. But if you give children too little nutrition, the ability of the child to make good decisions is severely hampered. So the ability of the child to respond to even healthy behaviors is severely dampened if you don't have the right nutrition. And so take ADHD. I think that ADHD should always be first seen as a nutritional problem. So sometimes I provocatively say that ADHD is picky eating until proven otherwise. The nutrient-deprived brain is especially sensitive to being unable to produce the right levels of dopamine. And also to be able to generate things like melatonin and be able to sleep deeply through the night. Nutrition plays a huge role in brain functioning in the daytime and in the nighttime. So if you disrupt nutrition, the brain is already a pillar for the brain to be able to function. And you're going to tip the balance in the brain against dopamine and in favor of dynorphins. You're going to have dynorphin dominance with bad nutrition. And so we've been talking recently a lot about dynorphins, and that there's this, there's a kind of balance between dopamine, which is what you get with relief and with rewards, and dynorphin itself. So that if you have dominant dynorphins, you're going to have an irritable mood. You're going to have a hard time concentrating. You're going to be more emotionally reactive. In fact, dynorphin dominance will produce every symptom of ADHD. And so, but if you're not giving the brain the ability to make dopamine, you're stacking the deck against the brain, and you're going to tend more and more towards dynorphin dominance, dopamine deficit. But then sleep compounds it. If you have fragmented sleep, and kids on their own will likely have fragmented sleep, we know that problem sleeping correlate with ADHD severity. The worse the sleep, the more delayed it is, the worse the ADHD. So if nutrition sets you up for ADHD, and then poor sleep sets you up for ADHD, those are two massive problems. And it turns out screens also set you up for ADHD. If you take 5-year-olds, a 5-year-old who watches 2 or more hours on a screen a day, could be games, could be videos, is like 8 times more likely to have ADHD. If they're in the top tertile than if they're in the bottom tertile. So if you're the bottom third of people watching things, which means basically an hour. Actually, I think in the study, this is like 2,500 5-year-olds in Canada. But it was like if you watch 30 minutes a day or less, that's the bottom third. And if you watch 2 hours a day or more, that's the upper third. That upper third was 8 times more likely to then be diagnosable with ADHD at age 5. So that has to do because also these all compound. So the less you have healthy dopamine because of bad nutrition, the more you have fragmented sleep, which actually raises cortisol, which then raises dynorphins and makes you be in a worse mood and unable to focus the next day, then all of that's compounded by screens, which give you cheap dopamine because now you're going to be dependent on intense screen activity to hold your attention. But each of those cheap fixes of dopamine causes a little mini crash into dynorphins. So the more screen time people engage in, the more the general tone in their brain goes heavier and heavier into dynorphins. So messing with food, sleep, and screens tends to be the perfect way of making your child go into deeper and deeper depths of dynorphin dominance.
So it seems like also there's this general skill that kids have to learn over time, and they're not just born with this ability. And I would, I guess, just call it like delayed gratification to be able to engage something more difficult that has a reward later.
Yep.
To forego what's easy, so that they can
Yep.
grow in some way, and that's what a parent is for in especially as the younger the
Yep.
kid is, that the parent has to help the kid choose the more difficult path so that they can actually grow and develop. And all of these cases, food, sleep, and screens are particular instances of that, but that
That's
parents
exactly right.
have to give this general skill to the kids. And in previous episodes, and everything you've been saying in the last few minutes in terms of dynorphins and dopamines is all key to that, right?
That is. So so if a child is eating all the foods that are highly palatable, those foods are designed to give a brief spike of dopamine because they taste so good. But they're actually under nutritious. So they're being underfed in terms of nutrients, but overfed in terms of calories. So every time that child is then eating, there is some way in which they're getting instant gratification. But instant gratification like that, and this also happens with screens, where they're continually seeing highly palatable things to view. It's like the equivalent of the equivalent of ultra processed food is
YouTube Shorts.
Yeah, YouTube Shorts, exactly. And so they're highly palatable for the attention. So they get these continual little bits of dopamine but the fact that they're avoiding discomfort and pursuing immediate pleasure results then in this biopponent process. They're going to get an upswing of dynorphins right after that. You always get a little mini crash. So that's the problem with highly palatable things, is that they fool us into thinking that this is exactly what we're looking for, but it's not. So, and then you get this crash. And with ADHD, and it'd be great for us to talk more at some point about ADHD, but it's best thought of as a little micro addiction. You get little bursts of cheap dopamine and then little mini crashes happening all the time. But the result is that the dominant tone ends up being dominated by dynorphins. So if you want to lower your energy and lower your mood, well, then continually pursue highly palatable food and entertainment. That continually seeking for those things is guaranteed to cause this lower baseline into dynorphins. It's going to lower your baseline mood. But the more it does that, the more dynorphins counteract dopamine, meaning it's actually harder for the prefrontal cortex to think about consequences, to measure them, and to, in fact, attend to anything. So you're going to have lower motivation, poorer impulse control, which is going to lead to more compulsive taking in of these highly palatable foods and entertainments. So the child's brain is not designed to resist that. So for adults, we actually have an upper cortex that's fully functional. So its first job is to actually delay gratification and welcome dynorphins. So that's the key, that you can actually see that, okay, as much as I would want this right now, I'm going to wait. that gives you a dip into dynorphins, but then you actually get a subsequent upsurge of dopamine as a result of that little victory. So that victory gives you dopamine, a boost, which you can then actually do the second thing why we need a cortex. So the first is to delay gratification. The second is to actually invest the coming little burst of dopamine into some new challenging behavior so that you can master it more quickly, whatever that might be. And then the third is to actually set up a regular challenge on that theme so that you can be maintaining dopamine in the long run. The more you work into your life, embracing little acts of discomfort, the ideal is setting little challenges that will stretch you. The discomfort of the stretch is the perfect dose of dynorphin. And that's actually how you guarantee rising and rising levels of dopamine. And so the result is that embracing discomfort actually leads to higher levels of energy and motivation. But children cannot do that on their own. They don't have a prefrontal cortex that is ready to do any of those jobs. So parents are there to supply the prefrontal cortex for the child. And parents' job is to help the child to embrace the discomfort, to help the child to chart a course of growth, and then help the child to be able to consistently maintain a certain level of challenge in their life. And so that actually becomes a way then of understanding the entire field of research into optimal parenting.
I love that, Kevin. You said it so calmly, but it's such a big idea. It's so good that so I love the idea of the parent being like donating their prefrontal cortex to their child. It's a beautiful thing.
Yes, because we just know that neurologically, children are not capable of sustaining challenge, like living in their life without a parent to help guide them.
Mm-hmm.
So it's expecting too much. But so the bond that the parent has with the child, that is the crucial link. When a parent bonds with their child, their prefrontal cortex is now available. And if the parent can be helping the child to see that this discomfort, although it's truly uncomfortable, is actually not bad at all. It's perfectly normal and it's temporary. They can actually help the child learn to welcome it. So Daniel Siegel, he always emphasizes like books like The Whole Brain Child or No Drama Discipline. I like all his stuff. I don't know if it's the complete picture of what I would call optimal parenting, but it's pretty close. And he always says the first thing you have to do when you're needing to discipline a child, first connect and then redirect.
Mm-hmm.
If you just redirect without connecting, you're missing this chance. Connecting at the level of whole attention, warmly validating, that's such an important thing that we should probably at some point go much more deep into that. But it's the first step.
Yeah. So, and I guess this is a framework for, you could just use the term optimal parenting, which is great.
Yeah.
Maybe the title of a future book, although I don't hesitate to make promises like that right now. So we're talking about in the context where a child is facing a challenge specifically. So optimal work is about helping children engage challenges in their life. And so there are going to be other areas of parenting where the framework that you're about to lay out and that you've been laying out for a minute or two is going to apply slightly differently. Is that right? And
yeah, that's right.
Okay.
So, just to make a plug though, I would love for people to check out the Reframer on optimal work, because the entire approach of optimal parenting is actually we've built that into the Reframer. So if you go to the Reframer, the premium Reframer, and you say, help me with my child, and you say what the challenge is, the Reframer will actually take parents through the steps that we'll be outlining in future episodes to help walk them through. But people can get started now and seeing what it feels like and how you go through it.
Yeah. So, so let's just lay out these three stages, right, or steps right now. And then we can dive into each one in a subsequent episode. So first you had mentioned connection, connecting with your child as they're going through some sort of difficulty, as they're facing that dip and that dynorphin dip, right?
Yes, because when everything is easy and fun, the parent is like is there enjoying life along with them. But where parenting is really needed is when the child faces a challenge. And they may be tempted to get relief from the challenge by avoiding it. So parents are there to help children thrive on challenge. Jonathan Haidt says, one of his lines I liked a lot is, "It's the job of the parent to frustrate their children a little bit each day." So I love that line, that there's a sense in which challenges are actually the matter for real parenting. So that's where the direction occurs. So that's where you need to connect and redirect. Because the impulse that kids have will be for instant gratification and avoiding challenges. But their real growth, their real ability to thrive on challenge relies on the parent staying with them and then connecting with them. So the first thing is learning to more deeply connect. And it's good to see that when there's discomfort, children are in fact, everyone, we are highly bondable. The moment of suffering is actually a moment of intense bondability. And children are just designed, it seems, to be able, when they're suffering, the bond with the parent is it's like the key fitting in the keyhole. That's exactly what the child needs. So that's maybe most exercised in terms of compassion, what does it mean to truly be compassionate when you have a child who's suffering? But I would call that first step connection, because it applies more broadly. So it's in the good moments, in the tough moments, and everything in between. To be thinking always the first thing is the bond with the child. The second thing then, and that actually is how you help through the dip in dynorphins. It's like their mood and energy and motivation and will dip down as dynorphins briefly dominate, to stabilize that brief time of dynorphin dominance, in which the kid is going to feel restless or irritable, and that's where the bond is what's most needed. So that's where that comes to the fore. But then you get this upswing, where now that they've gotten through that wave of dynorphin through opponent process, now in fact they're going to get a surge of dopamine. They're going to experience, it's like having gotten through that dip, now the wind is in their sails. Now they're flush with the thrill of victory. So they've been stabilized. And now they have this dopamine, and the parent is there to help shape what they do next to really engage the challenge. And so you could imagine a child that's terrified of horses. And you get them through the first, wave, of being terrified. And eventually then they start to, they're okay being on the horse. And now you can start to redirect that feeling of victory, that dopamine surge, into actually learning how to ride it. I say this as someone who's never learned how to ride horses, but I imagine that's how it works.
Yeah.
And then, so that's the second stage of helping them to be confident in building skills. And that's a really crucial area. And this gets into all the research in what's called self-efficacy. So if the first thing of connection ties into work of Daniel Siegel, but also John Bowlby and attachment theory, we'll see how important that is. It's really central. You have as much research depth or more on that next step of how do you invest dopamine for growth? Once you've gotten through the awkwardness of the initial, the downswing, now you have dopamine to invest. And then the third is consistency, which is to bring that skill, practicing that skill into the rhythm and life of the family. And so we can go through in future examples. Maybe it's good that in the future examples, we even just keep with these ideas of how do you handle picky eating, because that's about food. How do you handle refusal to go to bed? And how do you handle wanting screens at the wrong moments? So we could use those as examples in the future.
Perfect. Yeah, that sounds great. Yeah. So, thanks so much, Kevin, for this introduction and this broad sketch of optimal work parenting. Very excited to dive into it more in these next couple episodes.
And if people have any questions on this topic, we would love to hear from them, right?
Absolutely.
What's the best email for them to email us?
Team@optimalwork.
Okay.
That's great.
.com. Great.
That's right.
Wonderful. We'd love to hear whatever questions people have on this topic. We can be sure to answer them.
Awesome. Well, thanks so much, Kevin.
Thank you, Sharif.
All right. We'll be back next week. Thanks for tuning in to today's episode. If you enjoyed our conversation and you're looking for more in-depth guidance, check out optimwork.com, our unique platform that delivers content, tools, and exercises to help you thrive at work and beyond.